Full disclosure, first of all, I never did fly the F-4 Phantom in Vietnam. By the time I got into the Phantom, it was in 1977, and the war was a couple of years in the rearview mirror. And before I get started, let's do the rules of engagement. You know, the bathroom is in the back. If you need to go use the head, just get up and go. All right? If you need to sleep, sleep. All right? If you need to burp, burp. You're not going to offend me, okay? Like I said, sleep during my talk, it's fine. All right? Do what you got to do. No rules. So there are the rules of engagement. I also, before we get started, my wife Gretchen is here. I want to appreciate Gretchen for coming today. And sitting on the sofa in the middle is my friend, and actually, it's a sister I wish I had. This is Billy Ann Meeks. Now, Billy is named for her father, William Myers. Her father, William, was killed at the Battle of the Bulge. Her mother was carrying her at the time. All right, so she never got to meet her father, but she's made a couple trips back to the Netherlands, to Mont-Granton, where he is interred. And she's got a great story. So if you want to talk to a really interesting person, when we get done, just talk to my friend Billy Ann. All right. Thank you for coming, by the way. She came all the way from Chestertown, Maryland. So. Yeah. Okay. Again, yeah, my name is Mark Allen. I just came today. I'm going to talk a little about the F-4 Phantom. I can't talk about flying it in combat because I did not fly it in Vietnam. I flew it in a lot of other places after Vietnam for the next 5 wars. So, but before I get started, I want to read something to you, and I hope you'll bear with me. My brother George served in Vietnam with the 9th Marines in 68 and 69. And he's written his autobiography, and I like to read a little bit from his biography. And he writes about a time in about 19, he was a reserve major, and he was in Coronado. And while he was in Coronado, they had a reception one night, and another major came, and that major was wearing a presidential unit citation. And my brother wore the same citation, but he didn't recognize this major. Didn't understand how this major should be here wearing that particular decoration. So he asks him. So I walk up and I ask him, "Were you in the Ashaw Valley during February of 69? He replied, "No, not exactly. Over it." And then I noticed the aviator wings above his left breast pocket. He continued, "I was flying close air support for the part of that operation." Now, while that response certainly satisfied me, it unleashed a torrent of long repressed memories. And the memories were really focused around his unit had captured 2 122 millimeter artillery pieces. And they were scattered around those artillery pieces were a number of dead Russians and Viet Cong and other people like that. And so he goes on because he was with the engineers. He was going to rig these guns out and have them removed. And so while they're waiting for the flying crane helicopters to show up, but most stirring of all, this is his memory, my distinct memory of 2 Phantom jets coming on station early that morning, flying swiftly and silently from behind us at treetop level, slamming us with their delayed sound wash. I'm sure some of you know what that's like. They turned and circled to napalm and strafe the forward slope of the mountain, dropping down from our position, driving off remnants of the attacking enemy force so flying cranes could come in and lift out the captured ordnance in relative safety. When their ordnance was fully expended, they checked out with us on the Prick 25 radio, and as our radioman said, "Thanks, guys," into his headset, one of them did a wing rock in reply. So that's from my brother. My brother experienced F-4s in combat in Vietnam, and I just thought I'd read that for perspective. Okay, the F-4 Phantom. I went through flight school from 75. I got my wings early 77, and I was selected for F-4 Phantoms. And of course, I then I went out to Yuma, Arizona. That's where our RAG, or Replacement Air Group, was located at the time. Went through the RAG, and then I was assigned to VMF-8 333 in Beaufort, South Carolina. And trip tray, the Shamrocks. So by 78, I had punched a lot of tickets, and I was an Air Combat Tactics instructor. And then I got selected for Navy Fighter Weapons School. And if you've probably seen the movie Top Gun, you know, where they fly, and that's Top Gun is like, focuses on the pilots and dogfighting. But there's another aspect to Top Gun, which is for the RIOs, the backseaters. And because in an F-4 and also the F-14, those aircraft, because they were second and third generation fighters, they were more archaic, shall we say, than the newer airplanes you see today. And so they had a separate class. It was called Top Scope for the backseaters, or the RIOs, that were going through. And I went through, like I said, my class was March of 78. I flew. This is a Marine F-4. This is the F-4J. This is parked on the. It's got 3 external tanks there, and so that's obviously we're doing a probably a translant. And I think this was actually parked on the ramp at Lodges Air Force Base in the Azores. Again, most of you are probably familiar with what the F-4 looks like. The F-4J did not have the reticle underneath the nose, and had, of course, it sat 2 people, pilot and his RIO, and it was a Mach 2 capable aircraft. I made exactly 1 Mach 2 run in my career. That was over the Sea of Japan. We hit 2.2, and that was pretty exciting. I did my career in the Marine Corps. I got out of the Marine Corps in 1981. I was telling the story earlier. I had the tower duty at Beaufort one weekend, and when I came in on Sunday, there was an F-105 parked on the ramp out in front of the tower. And it had a Jersey flash on it, that's on the tail, and it said New Jersey across the tail. And so, I wonder who that is. So finally the pilot showed up, and I went up and introduced myself, and we got making small talk, and he says, we're getting the F-4 in just a couple months. He says, when are you getting out? I was getting out in a couple months. And he says, why don't you make a transition and come over to the Guard and keep flying F-4s? So that was a pretty good deal. So I did, and in June of '82, I took off a green suit and put on a blue suit, and I started flying F-4s. And I liked the Air Force F-4s. In the Marine Corps and the Navy, the F-4J, they upgraded it, and it became an F-4S. And the F-4S had something the Air Force did not have. It had a pulse Doppler look-down, shoot-down radar. It was guerrilla. It was an amazing airplane, and it could do everything that the F-15 could do and a lot more. But now the Air Force, incidentally, never did get a pulse Doppler look-down, shoot-down radar, but they had an internal gun, you know, the 20 millimeter Gatling gun on the nose. You can see it just underneath, right here. This is our gun, and would fire 1,000 rounds a second. With 100 rounds a second, and it was pretty much a lot of fun. This particular airplane is carrying the AIM-9 under one wing, and the F-4 Phantom typically in the air-to-air role would carry 4 AIM-7 Sparrows, and they were housed in semi-reposed Niacils right underneath here, 2 up front, and then 2 in the back, and so the about 50% of the missile was enclosed inside the aircraft. And then the AIM-9s, 4 AIM-9s would hang on the wing on launcher racks. So you would go into basically an air-to-air combat. You would be carrying a total load, 4x4s or 8 missiles. Just another shot of the F-4, a couple in formation. This is a side view of New Jersey. Oop, let's see. That's a New Jersey F-4. You can see the tail number NJ, and then this again, it's got its gun, and it's carrying an AIM-9 under the wing. This is the business part of the F-4. This is the radar. This is that pulse Doppler look down, shoot down radar. This is on a bench inside the radar shop being worked on. And this is the other business end. The F-4, they started flying the F-4 in 1958. And the F-4 was designed strictly as an air-to-air missile shooter. Didn't have a gun in the beginning. And it wasn't until Vietnam when MiGs were flying right smack dab in front of the F-4 and you couldn't shoot them because the missiles couldn't lock in that tight of a range that they finally put a gun on it. But the Marines got it. Marines in the Marine Corps, we don't have as much artillery as the Army. When you're splashing ashore off a boat, you just can't carry a bunch of cannons with you. So in the Marine Corps, our artillery is our aircraft. They are our artillery. And so the Marine Corps kind of liked the F-4 because the Marine Corps can hang a whole bunch of green bombs on it. I mean, lots of green bombs. And that's what we're about. We're about moving mud. And so this is a photograph of an F-4 with, that's called a TER, a triple ejection rack. And it's carrying 3 Mark 500-pound bombs loaded on the airplane. It also carried the cluster bombs. We like cluster bombs. Each one of these cluster bombs would carry up to 300 bomblets. All right, and the bomblets could do all kinds of things. Some bomblets would just lay on the ground until they sensed vibration, like somebody walking. Then they would pop up about groin level and go off. All right. Other bomblets would hit the ground and would bury themselves in the ground. So as people walk by, or a tank, or some kind of wheeled vehicle, and then they would go off like a mine. So the bomblets were a lot of fun. Like I said, they could carry up to 300 individual bomblets inside of each one of these canisters. And then there's some 500-pounders, and they're snake eyes. And a lot of you probably know what a snake eye is, but they're retarded bombs. Because one of the problems, if you're flying fast and you're low to the ground and you drop a 500-pounder, now it's going to hit the ground almost underneath your aircraft. And if it goes off, you're going to be in deep and serious doo-doo. But what the retards would do is they would, as soon as they came off the airplane, these wings would come out and it would slow the bomb so then it would hit the ground behind the airplane. They also did the same thing with what we call ballots, which had a parachute, would do the same type thing. Later, the F-4, and again, going back to Vietnam, what we learned in Vietnam was we needed point-accurate weapons. I mean, weapons that could hit, that you could run in through somebody's window, incredibly accurate. And so what they turned to was laser. They were laser identified. The F-4 was unique because we had 2 guys flying it. One guy could actually run the lasers, identify a target, and then engage or release the weapon, the bomb. This is a dumb bomb. This is nothing more than a 500-pounder with the retarded fins on the back. These happen to be open. And then it had up front, had wings. So it could actually turn and point. And then at the front end, you had a seeker. And the seeker would receive the laser energy reflected back off a target. So, and the place I used it in Vietnam, they used it against point defense targets like bridges. So if you're trying to take out a bridge, you'd put your lays on that bridge, you'd release your weapons, and that weapon is going to hit that laser exactly where it is. And that they were developed during the Vietnam War. And again, that was called Pave Spike, and that was something else. I was based at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and we did all these missions. We moved mud, we fired our gun, we did a lot of air-to-air. That was my shtick, was air-to-air. And then we also did smart weapons, like with the Pave Spike. This is just that's the unit that you would carry on your airplane. That's what it looked like, open, being worked on. That's the gun. That's the business end. 6-barrel Gatling gun, about 100 rounds a second, and it was pretty nice little weapon. The Gal 90 is used, the Gal 90 is the 30 millimeter, but the Gal 60 is used in a lot of different aircraft. So it's pretty common through the inventory. There's another picture of the gun. Again, the 6 barrels and it's drummed with the ammunition. That's set right behind the radar in the aircraft, up in the nose. Well, this is how your day starts. How back in the day, from World War I till today, is you post a schedule, and you come in the morning and you look to see where your name is, who you're flying with, what your mission is that day, and that's what you're going to do. And then you find a briefing room, you sit down, you start talking about it. Briefings last around 2 hours, and after you get done briefing, you're going to step to flight equipment, or life support. And the Air Force calls it life support, and the Marine Corps it was flight equipment. And you're going to gear up and go flying. All right. This is I took this shot. This is me with the Marine F4s, and you can see we have some. We have 6 500-pounders. We're obviously going to go and move some mud somewhere. We did a lot of what we call over-the-shoulder delivery, and that's where you fly. We would fly at a target, and we'd run our radar out, track it, and pick up around 650 to 700 knots, and about maybe 100, 200 feet above the ground of the water, and the computers would take over, and they would track it, and then it would command a 4G pull-up, and you begin a 4G pull-up, and it got to a specific point, and the bomb would release automatically. Then it would fly to the target, which was about 10 miles away. All that kinetic energy was converted to flight time. That's the way you would deliver, a nuclear weapon. And so we would practice that because it was fun to do. And this is my crew chief this is actually taken when I was in Japan, and Iwakuni, Japan, and that was my crew chief. That's the cockpits of the F4, front and back cockpits. This is the pilot seat, analog, and it looks busy, but it's everything's in sections. You have your engine section, you have your weapons section, you have your instrumentation to fly the airplane. So everything's organized, and you practice a scan. So you scan your instruments and make sure everything's where it needs to be, and you're only dealing with one thing at a time, hopefully. This is a typical fighter pilot, my friend Bobby Marks, and that's the back cockpit. A little bit different. It's really focused around the radar because that's what we're there for, is to run that radar. But then we had a duplicate of the instrumentation, and this is the AIM-9, just on a bench, but they look like they're about 8 feet, 9 feet tall, and they've advanced in Vietnam. The AIM-9s were basically heat seekers. You had to be behind a guy, and you would get the growl. You hear the growl, and that meant the missile. Okay, I see the target. Then you could release the missile, and off it would go, and it would crawl up its tailpipe, hopefully. But by the time I got out of the Marine Corps, and even in the Air Force, they had come out what they called the AIM-9 Lima, and then a mic, and they could sense enough heat in the forward quarter as you're flying towards somebody. They would sense the heat of the aircraft and the air and the wind, and it was enough to get a growl. So you could actually shoot an AIM-9 in the forward quarter, which was pretty cool. That's just a crappy picture of an F4. Okay, a VMFA 333 F4. We had 3 shamrocks on the tail, and if you get an email from me and I'm really happy, you'll get 3 shamrocks. So this happens. This is over the Philippines. This is F4s at McGuire. We had a big hangar at McGuire, and I tell you why I took this picture, because in the Marine Corps, you had a job. You had a real job. I was a maintenance officer. My job was to make sure the airplanes were being maintained and taken care of. All right. I had a collateral duty. The collateral duty was flying. Okay, your real job was a ground job. And so I spent a lot of time on a hangar deck in the Marine Corps, but in the Air Force, this was our hangar, and I was fascinated. I was fascinated because the Air Force, look at that floor. You can eat off of that floor. Okay, let me tell you what, we didn't have that in the Marine Corps. All right, you didn't have that, and I just so anybody who's lived that life, you see that photograph, Navy or Marine Corps, you look at that hangar deck and you say, what's going on here? You know, I don't have to say anything more. So. That's the J79 engine. The F4 had 2 of these in it. They were about 15 feet long, and they each put out around 18,000 pounds of thrust. You had 2 of them. So combined at full afterburner, the airplane put out around 36,000 pounds in thrust. If you have a 32,000 pound airplane like the F4, 36 pounds of thrust means you have a positive thrust to weight ratio. You can stand the airplane on its tail and accelerate going straight up. A lot of power. And that's what the F4 had going for it. The whole time it flew is the power. All right, we had power like nobody else had. And these are the kind of, you know, and I like this picture because these are the kind of kids that took care of that airplane and worked at it. They would drop those engines and they could repair these engines. Then they would take them to a cell and they would run the engines. And I was always fascinated how you could take an 18, 19-year-old kid and how they could work on these engines.
Who taught them?
Huh? Well, they went to that, well, the Coast Guard, they call it A school, but they had schools they went to and they learned. But most of it, I think, was, then they would come to the fleet, or the Marine Corps, you know, would come to the fleet, and then they would learn from other, you know, senior staff NCOs. But it's amazing how smart these kids are. All right, and I had so much respect for them. This is a TA-4, and it's all greased up there with camouflage markings. This is one of the aggressor aircraft at Top Gun. All right, they used, not anymore, I don't think they use them anymore. This is a TA-4. It had the same performance of a MiG-17 as far as turn rate, speed, things like that. And so to duplicate the MiG-17, they used to use TA-4s at Top Gun. And we had TA-4s at Beaufort, and I got to fly the TA-4 a number of times, and I'm bigger now than I was then, okay? Take 100 pounds off of me. That's how much I weighed when I was in the Marine Corps, all right? I would get in that airplane, and I had to go like this, and then I had to close the canopy because it was so tight. And then once the canopy came down, you'd kind of like form fit yourself to inside the cockpit. Tiny little cockpits, but the airplane could turn on a dime. It's really a lot of fun to fly it. And the replacement for the F4 was the F-18, of course. This is a really early F-18, probably going to ramp at, this is going to ramp at, in Washington, D.C. at Andrews Air Force Base. And in the back is my F4. We had gone up there for a static display. And this is the first time I had seen an F-18 up close. So I was kind of fascinated. I took this picture. And this is the flight line. I like this picture because in the foreground, you see an old T-34, which they don't use anymore. But that was a primary trainer in the Navy for, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 years. And so you have the old T-34. Right before on the T-34, you have the F-18. And then you have an RF-4. See the tiger teeth? Okay, that's a reconnaissance version. I threw this in here because the F-4 was such a unique airplane. It was used for so many missions. And then in the 60s, they realized, you know what? The old F-101, RF-101s, were getting old, long of tooth. So they said, let's put cameras in the F-4. And they came out with the RF-4. And it was, you know, camera airplane, and that's a reconnaissance airplane. And they had it, their motto was unarmed and unafraid. but they'd go into the target areas very low, very, very fast, and they would take pictures. And you need photographs after you've had a strike to see how you did, your BDA, your bomb damage assessment. And so that's what the RF-4s were. And then the last aircraft in the line, of course, is my F-4E. Hellcats, I put in here to remember where we came from. This is an old Navy Hellcat, which is a like a weather vane on the ramp at Andrews. And here again, that's an RF-4. Fast, 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 fast. I flew an RF-4, interestingly, never with the Americans. I was part of an exercise called Tiger Meet back in 1988, and I befriended a man from the Luftwaffe, Peter Witt. And Peter and I became very close very quickly. And one day he says to me, "Hey, you want to go flying with me?" Now this was really against the rules, you know. So I said, "Yeah." So, you know, you're too stupid to know better. So I strapped into his RF-4 and we went flying up through the Alps, and it was pretty much a lot of fun. Never got caught, thank goodness. I threw this in here because all the places you go, you know, you travel a lot. Balıkesir, Turkey. I found myself in Balıkesir, Turkey in 1970. When did the Shah get deposed? 79? Yeah. Right? Yeah. 1979, President Carter couldn't decide what we're going to do. Are we going to go into Iran and put the Shah back in power? Because, you know, he had bought a lot of F-4s, he bought a lot of F-14s, and he was a very good friend of the Americans, but it wasn't a very good friend of his people. And so they threw him out. But Mr. Carter, President Carter, was contemplating, maybe you guys know the term mount out, having a mount out and going in and putting the Shah back in power. And so my squadron was part of a composite group of, we had an A6 squadron, we had an A4 squadron, we had a couple RFs, we had the new A6, you know, the electronic version A6, and we had an F4 squadron. And we were sent to Balıkesir, and it was a nightmare. I hated it. I lived in tents with, you know, great big long bugs crawling up the tents. I got sick, and but did very little flying, but just a lot of waiting, sitting around waiting. Do I have to tell you about that? Waiting for somebody to make a decision. And we decided never to do anything, so we loaded up and came home. This is in Japan. So that was in 79. In 1980, I deployed my squadron, Trip Tray. We deployed to Iwakuni, Japan. Iwakuni is on the Kyushu island. It's about 100 miles from Hiroshima, down along to the south and west. I was a maintenance officer, as I said. So what that means, I spent most of my day on the flight deck, so I flew early in the morning. I mean, like really early, sunrise. I had the first go of the day, and this is a photograph. I went down, and they're pushing my airplane, pushing my F-4 out of the hangar because I had the dawn patrol. And the guys that were attached to me weren't real happy about that. There's a picture of my crew chief, all right? Not happy at all because he was Captain Allen's crew chief, and if I had to be out there at 6 o'clock in the morning, guess what time he had to be out there? About 4:30, all right? Not a happy puppy, okay? Another guy who was not at all happy was my front seater, my stick. This is Chicken Man, Dave Law, my best friend. Look at the look. I'm not even going to tell you what he was calling me at that time. He was my roommate, but he was not a happy puppy. And he probably just came in from a Longapo, maybe an hour before. Not Longapo, we weren't in the Philippines, we were in Iwakuni. But he probably just came in from the Ville about an hour before because he was a wild man. Good pilot. Best natural-born fighter pilot I had ever got to know. This is, believe it or not, this is the mountains around Japan. And that's Iwakuni, and Marine Corps Air Station Iwakuni. You can see the runway below. And that's Hiroshima. really crappy photograph of Hiroshima, but that is Hiroshima. And a lot of things are the same. They have Dunkin' Donuts. I was fascinated by that. You know, it's 1980, and I get over there, and there's Dunkin' Donuts. This is great. This is like America. You know, they had Dunkin' Donuts, and they had kids. I just had my daughter. We adopted my daughter a couple months before my deployment, and man, she was 7 weeks old. We adopted her, and I missed her like crazy. And so I was in Hiroshima with a couple of my sergeants, and I was fascinated by the kids. I had to take kid pictures. There's another kid missing his teeth, and kids are kids, man. Think about it. I don't care what country you're in. Kids are kids. You know? Got to take care of the kids. Tea houses. I like the Iwakuni. I like Japan. More kids. Sorry. But I love them.
Was the air base near at the Danish?
The air base was about an hour from Hiroshima. By train. We could take a train from Iwakuni, in about an hour.
The Naval Academy, the Japanese Naval Academy at the Jima.
Oh, that's Curie. That's up closer to Tokyo. That's pretty far away.
No, this was near. We could in an hour. We could get less than an hour. We could get to Hiroshima.
Did you go south or north?
We went south.
Yeah, you were north. Okay. See, I was south. I was south of Hiroshima. Yeah.
I was there when it was horror.
Oh, yeah? All right, I threw this in here because my career kind of coincided with the advent of a lot of women. Okay, they were opening up more and more fields for women. When my squadron with Trip Tray deployed to Iwakuni in 1980, we actually were the first gun squadron to deploy with women integrated within the squadron. We had three, one of whom was one of mine, Sergeant Connie Gauls. That's her in the front, of course. And I just thought I'd throw this in here to make a comment about that. That's 1980. Women were just, in this case, in the Marine Corps, they were just starting to integrate women and I had a conversation one time with my CO, and we were told that, well, if the shit hits the fan, we'll evacuate the women. And I looked at him. I said, how can you do that? I said, our whole shop runs around all these people. She's a part of the machine. Are you going to take out a part of the machine just because the shit hit the fan? I never got an answer. But then again, fortunately for me, the shit never hit the fan. But because when we got to Iwakuni, some of our first in briefings were, you know about Korea, okay? Was we were never sure what the North Koreans were going to do. We're still not sure what the North Koreans are going to do. And we were always prepared for the North Koreans to walk across their DMZ. And that was just part of your life. And my A4 friends, guys flying the A4, this freaked me out. An A4 pilot, when he would do training, and they trained and carried live nukes, okay? But he trained with an eye patch. They trained with an eye patch because if they were going on a nuclear delivery, they would lower the patch over one of their eyes. So when it went off and their other eye melted down their cheek, they could flip up the patch and maybe make it home.
Well, that's heartwarming.
It's doomsday. That's why you got to avoid this kind of nonsense. Okay? You know, you hear these briefings, you go, are you people crazy? Oh, anyway. We had women attached to us. Oh, this is me and a pair of my gunnery sergeants. We're on our way to
Nice shirt.
yeah. we're on our way to Hiroshima. That's Gunny Miller.
Rugby player.
Yeah, that's Gunny Miller. He was my NCO. I see. All right. Sometimes you're on a flight line all day. You saw sunrise. You're gonna probably see sunset. And look at those shamrocks. Aren't they beautiful? Okay, F-Force in the Air Force. This is an F-4E in Norway. My squadron, the squadron that I flew with in the Air Force or the Air National Guard was 141st Tactical Fighter Squadron. And the cool thing about the 141st is we had the second oldest lineage of a fighter squadron in the Air Force. Second only to the 1st Air Squadron and the Hat in the Ring Squadron. The Hat in the Ring Squadron was the first squadron and to form in France in 1918, and 141st was the second. But we used to run these exercises, and what they were called checkered flag, and the idea was if the bubble goes up, you know, and the Soviets come across the border, we all had a job to do. And we would practice that by deploying. And our location was first, it was in Stavanger, Norway, and then it became Buda, which is up about 100 miles north of the Arctic Circle. So this in Buda, Norway, and they would just, the Norwegians would dig out bomb proofs right in the rocks, you know, and then we would taxi in and they would push our airplanes back into the pad called lollipops, and so that's where we parked or lived in Buda. 1988, I mentioned when I was flying with Peter Vitt, it was called Tiger Meet. I got selected to go to represent the United States at Tiger Meet. What this is once every, I think, 4 or 5 years in NATO, all the squadrons that have Tiger as their emblem or as their mascot, they would get together in a NATO country and have a big fly-off, big competition. It's like a 5-day party and flying. It's amazing. And this year we were in Italy, Camere, Italy, up near Turin. And I took this photograph because the Italians were flying the F-104 at the time, the Starfighter. Isn't that a cool looking airplane? And that airplane, the F-104, had one of those big J-79 engines in it. Okay, but look at the wings. If you walked around that airplane and happened to bump into that wing, you would cut yourself because those wings were so sharp. But that's an F-104, and this photograph was taken during Tiger Meet. See, and whoever the host squadron is, they would take one of their airplanes and they would paint it up like a tiger, and it was great fun. Great flying. And the best part of deploying, of course, is coming home. And when we came back from Iwakuni or from the Westpac tour, the Officers' Wives Club, they bought a billboard and put this up to welcome us home. And here's the reason we do it, right? These kind of guys are all over the world, and they're not nice people. And you got to stay on your guard at all times. And this is another reason. This is a MiG-29 Fulcrum. And when we're coming, we have the F-4, we came out with the F-15, we got the F-16s, and we got F-18s, and then the Soviets came out with the Fulcrum. And the Fulcrum is an amazing airplane. And like us, with our F-35s, that all our different NATO countries are buying them, well, a lot of the other bloc countries were buying the Fulcrum. So Fulcrums were really in evidence around the world in the 1990s and early 2000s. This is an older airplane. It's called a fish bed. Where we have the A-10, they had this. And then they had a Flogger G, which is a MiG-23. MiG-23 had variable geometry wings, like the F-14. Okay, had a variable geometry wings. And then the Frogfoot Su-25, which again is much like the A-10, same kind of mission. And a flanker. The Flanker was a huge, great, big, heavy fighter, and it was probably too heavy, but it was overpowered. So, a Fencer. These are all airplanes, Soviet-type airplanes. Of course, we had things like the F-111 or Aardvark, which has been long since retired. That's what we went after the Libyans with. And we have allies. This is a Mirage, flown by the Spaniards. These are F-16s. Of course, they are the hottest thing on the street for a few years. Now we got the F-35. This is a Mirage F-1E. Great airplane, really nice airplane. This is like a Spanish fly it, French fly it. This is refueling. This is the way the Navy and the Marine Corps refuel. It's called a drogue. And not to get sexual, but in this kind of refueling, the probe is on the receiver, okay? And then the tanker will drag a boom, suspend a boom out of a pod, and then you come up behind it and you put your probe out. And yeah, exactly. Well, no, that's different. That's the Air Force. I'm going to show that. This is the way the Navy and the Marine Corps does it, okay? This is the way the Air Force does it, okay? This is a KC-135, and this is refueling a B-2, and completely reversed. The Air Force, the tanker, has got the probe, the male, if you will, and while the receiver has the receptacle, female, if you will, and you would fly up behind, they would fly to what they call pre-contact position, right behind the tanker, about 10 feet back, and they'd stabilize right there behind you. And then the boom operator, the boom operator would lower her boom and place her receptacle into the receiver. And I say her because most of the boom operators were female in the Air Force at this time, because of the touch. All right, had a lot of female boom operators. I used to find it ironic. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. After Desert Storm, by Squadron, the Air Force came out with a new concept that was called Total Force Concept. In other words, everybody's going to be available for deployment to war zones, including the Guard, reserves, everybody. And to do that mission, and the other component of Total Force is they wanted to be able to reach out and touch any country on the planet by launching from the United States. Okay? And we're talking about the big B-2s, the stealth bombers, the big B-1s. We want to be able to launch our bombers from the middle of the United States and go touch anybody in the world, anytime. Well, you need tankers to do that. You need a lot of tankers. So my squadron, 141st Tactical Fighter Squadron, we became the 141st Air Refueling Squadron, and we got the KC-135. So at the tender age of 38, the Air Force sent me back to flight school, and I had to learn a new airplane, and I went from a fighter, an F-4 Phantom, to a KC-135. Sometimes people ask me, what's that like, transition, from an F-4 Phantom to a KC-135? And my best way to describe that is, it's like, say you spend all day Sunday with your best girlfriend in your Corvette convertible flying up Highway 101 in California at 110 miles an hour, and then you get out of that Corvette convertible and you get into a school bus on Monday morning with 4 flat tires and an empty tank of gas and 80 fourth graders. Okay? That's pretty much what it's like. But you know what? You're still flying. F-16s, nice airplane. And again, this is kind of what it looks like. This is what we call a cell. You have a tanker, and you have a flight, and you have 6 F-4s. I'm taking the picture so you can't see me, and you just take turns coming on, and it's all sequenced, choreographed, You take your turns getting onto the tanker and off of the tanker. And when the Air Force plans like a translant or transpac, it's choreographed to the point where you may get on a tanker, fill up your airplane, drop off, everybody fills up, and you may get right back on. Because at all times, they want your airplane to be within reach of ground that you can land in an emergency. So it's very carefully choreographed, and that's kind of what it looks like. This is what it looks like if you can get this from the tanker. Okay, this is what she's seeing. This is her boom, of course. These are the wings that fly the boom, and that's the receptacle that she's going to pass gas out of. This is an F4 coming up behind her. Now, right behind my cockpit, about 3 feet behind my cockpit, is a receptacle. And there's a little door. It opens up, and there's a receptacle. And then what she has to do is she's got to take the probe, and she's got to lock it into that receptacle. And then she can pass gas. That's a close-up shot. Now, she's passing gas in this picture. You got the boom, got the F4. You can see that little door right behind the cockpit. That's what it looks like. And we did it all the time. All the time. Almost every mission, you were refueling. Because the F4 Phantom, big airplane, we carried around 12,000 pounds internally. Without the wing tanks, without external tanks, we carried 12,000 pounds internal. At full afterburner, we burned 1,000 pounds a minute. So do the math, okay? You take off at full afterburner, you get in the air, all right? As you come into an engagement, you're probably going to be touching afterburner. Maybe one engine's in afterburner, the other's in min, and you burn fuel like crazy in an F4 Phantom. So almost every single mission, every combat mission, for sure, had a refueling as part of it.
What was the fuel?
Pardon?
What was it?
JP4, and then near the end of my career, we started using JP5.
Which is what?
Jet fuel. Like kerosene, basically. You know, if there were a puddle on the floor and you dropped your cigarette in it, nothing happened. Fumes, it really burns fumes. It's designed really not to burn. So JP4, JP5. I understand today they're using JP8, which I've never dealt with it. So you fly your sortie, you're done, you come back, you debrief. This is where you are debriefing. And what you did right, what you did wrong. We had a joke. The first guy to the bulletin board wins the fight, you know.
What were you looking for, though, when you say you debrief? What were you...
Oh, you know what? That's a good question. And really what you do in a debrief is, in the brief, you know, you go into this room and you talk about everything. Okay, what time are we going to step out of this building to the jets? What time are we going to strap in? What time are we going to turn the engines? All right? What time are we going to taxi? You go over all that. Everything. You go over we call it chair flying. You go over every single aspect of what that flight is. We're going to take off, and when we take off, we're going to fly what kind of a departure? Who are we going to talk to? When are we going to change radios? Okay, we go up to the warning area or the target area. Who do we check in with? What time are we going to check in? All right, what if this happens? What if that happens? You go through all the what ifs, the possibilities, and then you fly the sortie, and that's where the chaos is, because you never know what's going to happen during the sortie. And then you get back together and you come home and land. And then at the debrief, you sit there and you say, okay, we started the engine, what time? And you just basically go through the entire sortie, okay, and you talk about what you did right, what you did well, what you did, not so well. And you fess up, you talk about it, you know, and hopefully you live to do it another day.
And that was every time you flew?
Every time you flew. And in tankers, in the KC-135, all right, the briefing was, a briefing was typically, in the F4, you could brief it in about 40 minutes. And the tanker was easily an hour and a half because there was a lot going on in the tanker. So, yeah, you do. You spend a lot of time talking about what you're going to do and what you did. All right? Spend more time doing that than you do, flying around with your hair on fire.
Is that Bob Hope in the middle?
No, that's Chuck Yeager.
Is it really?
Yeah. I got to fly with Chuck Yeager in October of 1988. Good story. The guy to the right is Vince Putz. He was my best friend at the time, and Vince was our safety officer in our squadron. And I had a civilian job, I would fly almost every Wednesday night, Friday night, and Saturdays. But he calls me one day and he says, what are you doing next weekend? I say, I don't know. Why? And he says, how would you like to do a cross country with Chuck Yeager? Well, the deal was this. The general was coming to New Jersey. He was going to speak at the governor's ball up in Trenton. And then afterward, he was going to speak the next night at a function up there. And then our squadron, 141st, we offered for him to take one of our F4s down to Harlingen, Texas. Now today they call it the Commemorative Air Force. Back in the day, it was called the Confederate Air Force, and they flew these, warbirds, World War II warbirds down there in Harlingen, Texas. And so he had a big gig to speak at the Confederate Air Force soiree they were having down in Texas, and he was going to be on Good Morning America. It was a big deal. It was a real big deal. But the regulations for an Air Force general officer to fly in an Air Force airplane, technically we're still Air Force, okay, he had to have an instructor with him, okay? And I was an instructor. So guess what? I got to be Chuck Yeager's instructor. Yeah, bullshit, right? Anyway, so it was cool. So I went up to the governor's ball, and I ended up, essentially I filled in as his aide, The thing about Chuck Yeager, if you read his book, he writes about fishing for the golden trout. So wherever he goes, people are giving him what? Fishing poles. Fishing poles. Fishing poles. So, I collected the fishing poles, and I was there and kind of shuffled him around. And then we get done at the governor's ball, and we're going to leave the next day for Harlingen, Texas. And so we're going to brief at McGuire, and briefing time is like 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I finally got home from Trenton that night, like about, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. So I got a couple hours sleep, turn around, hour drive to Trenton, up to McGuire. And I'll never forget this. I got to the briefing room, and I set the briefing room up because you got to write everything on the board. Your call sign, takeoff time, everything. You got to fill all the blocks in. So I'm writing on the board, getting everything set for the briefing. I'm going to do the briefing, and then I'm sitting there, and he walks in the room. He walks in the room just like any other crew dog, And I remember that hit me really hard, like, wow. And so he came in. I briefed the sortie, and there were two ship, and I was in his back seat. And the funny thing about Chuck Yeager, if you read his book, the thing he always gives credence to as far as his success in aviation is his eyesight. The guy had amazing, like 20/10 eyesight, amazing eyesight. And now I'm in the back seat, and we took off out of McGuire. We're heading down to Texas, so we had to refuel on the way. Remember refueling? You don't go real far in the F4 unless you refuel. So we were supposed to rendezvous with a tanker over Seymour Junction, which is South Carolina. And so we're flying down, and I'm figuring the tanker's probably in the neighborhood of 80, 90 miles away. So I run my radar out, and then finally at 60 miles, I pick up the blip. So I check it out. Yeah, that's my tanker. So I call it, leads contact tanker, 60 miles. And just like this, the general comes back to me, and he says, I'm tally-ho. And I go, General, excuse my French, that's 60 fucking miles. And he goes, Roger, I'm Tally. I said, it's your intercept. I mean, I could do it on the radar, you know, from us, or he could do it visually if he wants to. And he goes, Roger, it's my intercept. And just as a beautiful intercept as you can imagine, we come up behind the tanker. We took our gas. Our signal wingman took his gas and kissed him off and went on down to Texas. And that's General Chuck Yeager. Rest in peace. And neat guy, he spent a lot of time with us. We get down to Harlingen, and we taxi in, and it's beautiful women coming out of the woodwork, you know, for General Yeager. And I'm putting the airplane to bed because we had to put down locks on it, and I had to repack the drag chute. So I'm putting the airplane to bed, and then that night we had another ball to go to, and somebody gave me a suit, and so we went to the ball that night, and then the next morning I'm on the flight line, and it's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and again, what have I got in my hands? Fishing poles. And I had in the F4 we had a baggage pod. It was an old fuel tank that we hollowed out, cleaned it, had a little door on it. You could put stuff inside because we had to carry our own jack pads, spare drag chutes, oil, you know, what we needed. You know, our go kit was in our baggage pod because there's no room in that cockpit. And so I'm in there. I'm trying to figure out where to put these fishing poles. And I'm there, and I'm in Texas. I'm sweating like crazy, and I'm just sweating. And all of a sudden I hear, "Hey, Mark, don't worry about it. That shit always finds me." I turn around, it's the general. So I said, "Hey, can I get your picture?" So he said, "Sure." So there was a woman on like I said, they're everywhere. She was on the flight line, and I got her to take a picture of me with the general and my friend Vince. So that's the story. And I'm sticking with it. Oh, I did a tour with the ground pounders. In between the F4 and the tanker, I wasn't sure what we were going to do, and therefore, then they sent me to school down to Florida near Eglin. At what's the name of the base? But I learned to be an ALO. ALO is like in Vietnam, you call them FACs, forward air controllers. Forward air controllers, and the new term for a forward air controller is ALO, Air Liaison Officer. So I trained to be an Air Liaison Officer, and that was an experience. That was fun. That was like playing Army, you know. We had a Humvee, and we ran around. We called in airstrikes. We were teams of 3. I became really close to 2 guys. This is one of them, and we did a lot, and we learned how to drive these Humvees and try not to get stuck. But we were smart because before we went, we got some coolers and steaks and beer. And so we spent like 3 days out in the bush. That was my ALO tour. That was as close as I wanted to get to that sort of thing. Thank you very much. And sad thing for me was, you know, the film Black Hawk Down. Okay. I knew a couple of those guys from this school. So that's tough duty. Oh, my 2 favorite girls. No offense. The F4 Phantom and Lori Allen. That's my daughter. And she, little story about Lori. In 2nd grade, first day of 2nd grade, teacher comes around the class and says, ask all the kids, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? She comes around the little Lori Allen. See her? And she says, what do you want to do when you grow up, Lori? Lori looks her right in the face and says, I'm going to fly fighters and kill MiGs. Well, guess who got called in for a conference? I mean, quickly. Within a couple days, I was in there with the principal and the teacher. And she says, she's telling me the story. She says, and your daughter says she wants to fly fighters and kill MiGs. And I looked at her and I said, that sounds like a noble profession to me. Oh, anyway, that's Lori. My kids literally grew up on the flight line at McGuire Air Force Base. Because I flew on Saturday so often, I would take the kids with me. And I would go fly, and one of my friends would watch my children. And they each had their own headset, and they would load them in the what we called mobile to go out and watch the takeoffs and landings. So my kids would go all over the flight line. And Matthew was kind of hyperactive. And if he got too hyperactive, our life support guys, they had a little harness, and they put him in the harness. And what they do is, to make sure everything fit right, is they would put you in your harness and hang you from the ceiling, under your harness. So they would hang Matthew. I came in one time, and he's in his harness, And the other thing they did was we had a full motion F4 simulator in our building, and my kids would fly it. They would get in that sim, and they would fly the F4 Phantom. So that's my kid's childhood. Yep, you can call Dyfus on me. They retired Trip Tray after the I think the second Gulf War. This is a gate guard at Beaufort, Marine Corps Air Station, Beaufort, and they put 3 shamrocks on the gate guard and 3 shamrocks in the tail, and our call sign Delta November, and I was sad to see it, but they retired Trip Tray after the second Gulf War.
What's why are the shamrocks on?
That was just our squadron. Some squadrons have different, symbology. Some have a skull. Some have checkerboards. Some have an eagle. We were 3 shamrocks. We had 333.
They were all Irish?
Well, I tell you what, it's a great question because, of course, any Marines in here? Okay. You know what a Marine Corps ball is like, right? Yeah. Okay. As big a day as a Marine Corps ball is, Shamrock ball was bigger. We threw the best party. Bar none, at the MCAS Beaufort when I was there. And it was a Shamrock ball for St. Patrick's Day.
Beaufort's right outside the beautiful Paris Island, South Carolina.
Yes, it is. Yep. In fact, my home down there, we looked over Beaufort Sound, and on Saturday when they were at the rifle range, you felt like you were in the range, because the creek was the impact area. All right, B2. This is a funny true story. When you fly the tanker, the KC-135, it dawned on me one time. We were on the flight deck. You had 3 officers. We were all lieutenant colonels. 3 officers flying the airplane: pilot, co-pilot, navigator. Okay. The person running the airplane is whom? The boom operator. All right. She's a 2-striper in the back of the airplane. Guess who's in charge? She is. That's the tanker. That's the tanker world. And this is a good example because we had these. This is the beginning. I think this is the Kosovo War. I deployed a number of times for Bosnia. I think I made 3 deployments for Bosnia, and it was a good deal because we worked out of Pisa, Italy. You can't beat that. And then during the Kosovo War, we deployed out of Frankfurt. But prior to that, we had sorties over the Atlantic Ocean, and we would take off, and we knew where we had to rendezvous with somebody, but we didn't know whom. The only person who knew on the airplane was the boom operator in the back. She knew because she had to know what she was looking for. And we found out later we were refilling B2s heading over to Kosovo. And there's a shot. Beautiful airplane. When the B2, when it turns like, if you're on the ground and it turns like that, it gives you a plan, not plan for, but head on, it disappears. Airplane disappears. It's so narrow, so thin, disappears. Unbelievable.
How many people can fit in that?
2.
Wow, that's it.
2. Yep, 2.
Is that the same ones they dropped the bombs in Iran?
Yes.
Same thing.
B2.
Well, they flew out of Nebraska, didn't
That's total force.
they? What?
What I explained earlier, back after the Persian Gulf War, is when they took my squadron and took us out of the F4 and put us in tankers. That's the whole concept, is we want to be able to launch a flight out of Nebraska and drop bombs anywhere in the world. Korea, anywhere in the world. They fly 32 to 33-hour missions.
So are there more KC-135s because of that? More
No, that's a great question, and you might think they built more, but they didn't. All they did was about that same time frame, the Soviet Union had kind of dissolved, so the mission of SAC, Strategic Air Command, had disintegrated, and all the tankers the Air Force used to have on alert to support that mission, they didn't need them for that anymore. So they had them available, and that's why they farmed them out to squadrons that used to fly in F4 or A-10s, and they gave them to those squadrons. So they just readjusted the whole picture of what they did. You're right, they flew out of Nebraska. And they would fly out of Nebraska. They would fly across the country. We would pick them up off of Atlantic City, and we would drag them over halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, okay, near the Azores, and then we would rendezvous with another group of tankers out of Europe, and they would pick them up and take them into the Med. See?
How do those guys stay awake for 30 hours?
Drugs. No, seriously. Oh, yeah.
I figured they ate a lot of chocolate or something.
No. And I understand in the B-2, I'm told, I never saw it myself, but they had a lounge. They could take a nap. Okay? Yeah. Probably.
And you say it could fit two in a B-2, fit one in the cockpit, but they put two in.
Yeah.
It was a little tiny.
Tanker, we didn't do a robust crew. We're just a basic crew. So I tell you what, some of the tiredest missions I ever had in my life was during Bosnia and Bosnia, because we were refueling everything in the NATO inventory. At our tankers, we not only did a probe and drogue, where we had a boom operator in the back, but we also had pods on our wings, and we would drag baskets. So like a Navy airplane would come that needed to plug into a basket. We could do that. We were refueling everything in the inventory, the NATO inventory during Kosovo. That was a really big deal. It was a real big deal. We're very fortunate we didn't lose people. Big deal. And this is what.
Building is similar to the only building that was standing in Hiroshima.
That's the building.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, that was really close to the epicenter where the bomb went off, and the bomb came down, so it didn't knock it down. And this is Hiroshima. I always throw this in here.
Oh, it just burns everything.
Yeah,
Just burns everything.
everything's gone.
Yeah, I mean, just
But that's a nuke. That's why we got to avoid it. Okay? There's no half measures with a nuke.
no.
None.
It's not only they kill 100,000 at the time it hits, it's another couple 100,000 that suffer
Awful.
die within a month.
That's something you do not want. And I don't know how you get that through people's heads, in different countries, and that's why I'm glad I went to Hiroshima, because it made an impression on me. It really did. And that's again why I throw this slide in there, is because I want to remind everybody, no matter, we've got to avoid this. And whether you think the way to avoid this is through a position of strength up front or surrender, that's up to you. You got to decide for yourself. But some of us feel one way, and others feel the other way.
Getting
But
under a desk, you think about
nothing is going to help you, because when that nuke goes off, it's 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
But
So-
it's a funny thing you mentioned way back, and not to take it over, but way back, when you dropped, you had to get out of there so that the concussion
Oh yeah.
pressure, when they dropped that was one of the biggest problems that they had. they weren't sure how to do it.
Well, that's why when we practiced any kind of a nuclear delivery, what I call it over the shoulder, you know, you're flying at the target, and we would fly in about 600 knots, all right? And then you begin a 4G pull-up, and then the computers release the weapon. And when it release, you can feel it when it comes. You can feel when 500 pounds comes off your airplane, okay? And as soon as it comes off, then you pull hard over, do an Emmelman, roll wings level, and you get your burners lit, and you're trying to get supersonic going away from the blast. Because it's only a matter of a couple minutes when that bomb will fly way up and then hit. And this is what happens. So I hope, like I've told Gretchen, I really want to get Gretchen there because I think everybody should visit Hiroshima. So nothing to fool with. Attrition. We want to make the other poor dumb slob die for his country. And that's what it's about. All right. A lot of beautiful sights. I love flying. I love the F4. I like the tanker, but I love the F4. And we had a beautiful glass canopy. And during the winter, we'd fly up over central Pennsylvania and see the northern lights and the stars and Milky Way. And it just was beautiful. And this is over the Philippines. Always beautiful clouds. So a lot of beautiful sunrises and sunsets. And so this is brought to you by the F4 Phantom and me. That's it.
Mark, thank you sincerely for reading the excerpt out of your brother's book.
Oh, thank you for listening. Yeah.